call to order on this day, April 20th, 2021 at 4:17 p.m. The board members are present at City Hall along with members of the public. Due to limited seating, members of the public are also watching the meeting online in the Florida room next door. Please be sure to submit to Mr. Floyd a speaker form if you wish to speak at the appropriate time on the agenda. We will call you over at that time. Others among the public are also attending this meeting through a digital platform that is accessible at the board's website. With the assistance of the Communications Department and the Information Technology Department, this meeting is live streamed on the Ethics Office's web page, and we are recording it for future reference. There is a delay with online communications, and we should all be patient. We thank those members of the City of Tallahassee for their support. May we all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Floyd, would you now please call the roll?
Carlos Ray, Lynn Graham,
Here.
Ryan Smith, here. Ronnie Payne,
Here.
Christina Costa,
Here.
Robin Blank,
Here.
Willie Barr.
Here.
Madam Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Floyd. For those attending the meeting online, please make sure your microphones are muted. Last week, we asked the public to make.
Yeah, I don't think you're on.
That much. Oh, I think my battery just went out. Pause for technology issues. All right, I will resume the meeting. Mr. Floyd just confirmed that we have a quorum. For those attending the meeting online, please make sure your microphone is muted. Last week, we asked the public to make a request by email to ethics@talgov.com by 1 p.m. on the day of the meeting, if they wish to speak online on agenda or non-agenda items. Those who have submitted their names will be given a chance to speak as scheduled. For those of you who are present and wish to speak, please complete a request form and forward it to the Ethics Officer, Dwight Floyd. Board members, has everyone received the agenda and supporting documents? Yes.
Yes.
With regard to the agenda or procedures for conducting today's business, are there any concerns or questions? I am now turning the meeting over to Mr. Carlos Ray, Chairman. We are on number 4, Mr. Ray.
All right. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Second. All those in favor? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Passes. All right, on to public comments on agenda items.
Yes, sir, we have 2 comments on agenda item 9. And I have a suggestion. The board attorney is out of the room and probably needs to hear the comments since he'll be presenting on that. If you would like, I can give the office report and then we can come back to that. She'll be back in by then.
Of course.
That's okay. That's fine. This has been a very, very busy month since our last meeting. Spent quite a bit of time working on a course that we'll talk about, the online course that we'll talk about later on. I had the privilege of doing a presentation for the Police Review Board on ethics, working with City Attorney Amy Coleman. She did the public records part, and I did the ethics part. as far as I know, it was successful. I think I taught 2 or 3 ethics classes for new employees. As you're aware, we met with the Ethics Commission, and I gave a presentation on that last time. Thought that was very fruitful. We're always working on whatever complaints that we received. And more or less, that's it. Like I said, I spent a lot of time working on the ethics course, which I'll talk about later on. With regard to the budget, don't have anything. Do you have any questions about anything that's on the budget? The chair won't let me spend anything. Monthly issue report. We received 3 calls on the hotline. First is really just to acknowledge publicly a case that was received on 1/28/21. It went to probable cause, and the board found no cause. And we received a call and a letter on 3/24/21. The letter alleged that the mayor is planning to use $18 million blueprint money to build a high-tech senior center in the Walani area. And she felt that public funds should not be used for this. I spoke to her because I wanted to clarify whether she was saying that something was going on untoward behind the scenes or was something philosophical. And as it turns out, it was just something philosophical. And I did not find legal sufficiency because he was performing within the span of his duties, as were the other city commissioners who all approved this. It wasn't just the mayor. So on this one, I recommend that we close it. And then I received a call on 4/9, and this was a city employee who was concerned about her job. I made a few phone calls and found a human relations representative and gave her that information so she could call the human relations representative. So I'm recommending that the 2 open cases be closed. Any questions about those?
Board on this report. Motion to accept their recommendations. Motion, second. Discussion. All's in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Well, I guess that's my report. We can do 7B while we're waiting.
So, Beach.
Yeah.
Okay.
And see objection. Give it time. 7B is the annual ethics refresher course. All city employees are required to take an ethics training course each year. It is tied to their merit increase. And we're trying to do it between May and August to give the tech people and financial people time to do what they need to do, should there be an increase. I have been working with HR staff, with some of the city's legal staff, as well as the board staff. And most of this course is called Building Trust Through Ethical Behavior. You've seen a lot of the material because the course that you approved last year is what I worked from. I recall when Ms. Graham recommended that we add social media, and it is in this course and is a very relevant part of this course. we've had some good discussions, and I would say even discoveries as we've gone through the course. There were some things I interpreted incorrectly, but I would say that, and one of them is on disclosure and use of non-public information. It said it, but I didn't read it the way it said it, that it's only for covered individuals. And you know, we have a little heartburn with that because anybody can wrongly give out information, but as it is right now, it's only for covered individuals. But at the same time, the legal staff informed me that there was a statute that covered employees. So that's a saving grace to me. And that was good because we could proceed to say that this needed to apply to everybody. But there are a number of areas where it was quite informative. The HR staff asked if the city manager could be involved. And you see him at the very beginning introducing the course. And then the chair follows. I'm going to put something on the end so people will know who I am and who to call and where to call. I don't know if I sent it to you all. I don't know if you had a chance to see it. Actually, I can look and tell who did it. But I was very pleased with what city manager, the way he presented, because the only thing I asked him to do was intertwine the organizational values and put emphasis on that. And he not only did that, but he acknowledged the board and staff for the work that the board is doing and for the course. And there seems to be a lot of excitement throughout the city with people who have reviewed it. We did a field test, had people review it because we wanted to make sure it was job related and not just, not just a generic course that would be uninteresting to them. And what I've been hearing is that people have found it interesting because they can see how it applies to them. We are working to try to finish it by the 3rd. I want to give you this opportunity to look at it and give some input. I'm going to bring it back next month and ask you to adopt it as an ethics board course. And we'll do it retroactive to the date that it's published. I know Ernie read it. Ernie saw it. He was the first one to look at it. And, I've got his feedback a little bit. And so I know he has comments.
Well, it's good. It's very good. I've seen so far. It's very good, especially that chair part. Chair part. Nice. Maybe on the ball.
And thank you for.
Sure.
But I promise you, for the next, I will review it.
Well,
I'm sorry, I haven't.
the whole thing takes about an hour, but
Oh, okay.
the second part I sent you with just the introduction, it's about 10 minutes if you all will look at that. I am eager for you all to look at that so you can get an idea of what production looks like. And because it is production, it's not just course. It's almost like a television production. It's production. And I've relied on my personal consultants. My daughter does this for a living. And so she's giving me feedback and I've made improvements as she gives me feedback. Like I said, legal review is a very important part of this. So John has had to go through the course as well as Amy, because we want to make sure we get the policies right as well as the ethics code. So.
Can it be nominated for an Emmy?
Well, I will tell you.
I'm telling you, the energy is building towards that.
I was pleased. One comment, and she was so serious, and I thought it was so funny. But she said, when you leave, you can make money off of this. And I want to say, well, this is just what I do. So.
And is it included in this? I apologize for not
No, sorry.
having viewed it yet. But is included in this the social media? part?
Oh, yes.
Well, good, because
Oh, yes.
I actually been trying to catch up on some of my CLE for my bar license. And I watched something recently on ethics, and a lot of it was about social media. So I think it's just such an important topic to address for ethics today.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that it's becoming an issue for employees. It's sort of a touchy issue because of First Amendment rights and that kind of stuff.
Right.
But at the same time, employees need to be aware that they don't need to do anything that's going to be harmful to the city or themselves and what they say. So that's essentially what it gets across, that you have no expectation of privacy. Nobody, one is trolling, but you have no expectation of privacy on what you post.
Right. And even if you think you're on private lockdown, assume you're not.
Right.
Assume everybody's seeing it. So I think the first thing I said as a member of this board was how you conduct yourselves means that you don't want anything ever printed in the Tallahassee Democrat that you would be embarrassed about. That's a good standard to hold yourself to.
We put, I think we put the proper amount of emphasis on it. Hopefully, when you all get a chance to look at it, you'll be with it.
Promise you I will.
Okay. And don't forget to call Carlos after you look at it. He had all of his hair in place.
Yeah. Figure out the too.
Hair's important.
Yes, Mr. thanks. As Mr. Floyd said, I did do the course in the past. I want to contribute my compliments. Very well done. I like not just the technical aspect of it, but the test, or the course materials first, and the test, the examples used, the foils on multiple choice questions. Well done all together. I agree that Mr. Go's introduction was great. One thing that makes me pause, you did a great job, Mr. Ray, but I think there needs to be more of an emphasis, a greater role for the ethics officer in that place. The ethics officer. I think it would be appropriate for the board chair to give a basic overview of the role of the ethics board, of our independents being appointed by community leaders rather than integrating the city structure, our role in oversight of the ethics officer, of adjudication of complaints, all that. But when you get into the content of what makes ethical behavior right and wrong, I think that role should fall to the ethics officer. Because a big part of the success of the office is establishing a relationship and rapport with the employees. And the employees are told not to go to you or to any other member of the board, but to the ethics officer for comments, complaints, or questions on anything. So it's important to establish that relationship up front. I know that when we went through the hiring process, remember we had over 80 applicants. We narrowed it down to 8 or 10 interviewees, narrowed that down further to 3. What impressed me most about Mr. Floyd not only was his experience, in training, ethics training with FPLE, but also the personality that he showed us during the interview process that indicated to me that he could make a good presentation of an ethics course that would inspire people to sit up and take notice, to ask questions, and all that kind of thing. So yes, there should be a role, but we don't ask these city employees to come to the ethics board for questions or complaints. We ask them to go to the ethics officer. So I think I've established that. Have him speak and just his face showed right up front. At the beginning, I know he said he was going to speak at the end, but I think there needs to be more emphasis on the role of the ethics officer.
Comments? I'll take direction from the ethics officer and I follow his direction. I think that speech wasn't my call, so whatever his preference is on that, and I'll work with that.
And I actually agree with Ernie in terms of building relationships. And I would say that whether I'm on the front or not, that is happening. And that's part of the reason we're presenting an advisory opinion today, and we have 2 more in the loop for next month, because we are building those relationships and people are starting to trust. And that's my personal professional emphasis is on culture and impacting the culture and building trust. And we're no different than what we preach in terms of exemplifying the values and building trust. So I work hard on that day to day. Be honest with you, if I have to record what I asked Carlos to do, right now it's not timely, because we're trying to get this done and get it out. And he actually saved me some work by doing that for me. But I will make sure, whether I'm at the end or at the beginning, I'll make sure people know who I am. Because I did hear it. I wasn't going to be there at all, but I'll make sure people know who I am. But I think it's important too that people respect the board, and they don't have to call the board, but they need to have some interaction. This is an opportunity for some positive interaction. Someone representing the board. It's not just me, because I still staff for the board. So I think that's always, people understand that I'm following, I'm not leading, following. And even though I'm there doing investigations and everything else, and they need to come to me when they have their complaints, in the end, those decisions are not made by me. Those decisions aren't made by me, they're made by the board. And so it's kind of have some balance. And that's what I was working for.
Mr. Floyd, I will do my best to review this in the next couple of days, and I'll
Yes, ma'am.
give you my thoughts on what Mr. Payne just said.
Okay.
I appreciate both of your humility in this. So we just want to make sure that whatever is ultimately approved meets everybody's expectations, and we're all good with it. So,
Okay.
Any more comments on 7B? Going back to 5.
We can go back to public comment on the agenda items. I want to wait until Joe is here. So, okay.
Any public comments on the agenda item?
Yeah, we'll start with this person. It's a stranger. I think it's Richard Perry. Agenda item 9.
see,
Thanks. I gave Mr. Floyd a one-pager that I hope he can share with you, and what I want to do is just talk very quickly about the 3 topics on there. These all relate to the concept of corruptly. As you move into your discussions on corruptly, the first thing is neither the ordinance nor the state law relies solely on the word corruptly to make decisions. It also, the ordinance and the law also require that the Public Officials Act result in some outcome. And the concept of resulting in is causal. And there's a lot of case law on causality, particularly in consumer protection areas, a lot of civil law on it. And I've given you on this one-pager 4 examples from opinions of the State Commission on Ethics, where they look at what resulted. And they said the vote can result in something, the sale can result in something. a zoning ordinance that impacts specific pieces of property. Very few specific pieces of property out of a large number of pieces of property can result in something. So I would suggest to you, as you think about how you are going to deal with this use issue, that you keep in mind the concept of causality. So if I, as a state, when I was a state employee, if I wrote a letter of recommendation for something, that didn't result in them getting or not getting the job. It probably went to some office somewhere where they check off that, yes, the person submitted 3 letters of recommendation, and the person went through the normal hiring process, the normal review process for years of service and education, training, background, all of that. That's what got them the job. It wasn't my letter. So my letter of recommendation is not the thing that is the special privilege. The letter is not the special privilege. It's getting the job. It's the result that's the special privilege. And I think that gives you a lot of room to move on the misuse area before you ever get to the concept of corruption. I would throw out too the Kinzer case, which is a DCA case from 1995, said on this issue that it requires substantial competent evidence under the state ethics code. So you've also got that concept of substantial competent evidence goes to the result in verdict. The second thing I'm going to hand out is that while the state ethics law continues to use the word corrupt, Chapter 838, which is the criminal law on bribery and misuse of public office, has stripped the word corruptly and the term corrupt use. In 2016, the legislature took out every instance of those words and replaced them with knowingly and intentionally. So the legislature has not done that as it relates to the state ethics law, Chapter 112, but they did do it in the criminal law, which in terms of standards and proof seems a little bit upside down, but I won't go into why the legislature does or doesn't do what it does. And my third point is, in 2010, there was a statewide grand jury impaneled by the governor. And they met, their first report specifically addressed public corruption. And they made a number of recommendations after talking to lots of prosecutors, talking to the State Commission on Ethics and their staff. One of those recommendations said specifically, and I'll quote here, the term corruptly should be removed from misuse of position as a civil ethical violation under Chapter 112. And the statewide grand jury went on to commend, to praise Palm Beach County for removing the word, what they said was removing the corrupt element from its code of ethics. So I think all of those things are relevant to your thinking through misuse of position and the word corruptly and all of the other bits of the standard for misuse of position, the other words and requirements that relate to misuse in addition to the word corrupt. Okay.
Sure. You bet, Peter. Peter Butzine.
Thank you. I'm Peter Butzine. I am here on behalf of the Citizens for Ethics Reform. And I always regret having to read my testimony, but since we're limited to 3 minutes, I want to make sure every word counts. There's so much more I wish I could say on this subject. Under Mr. Herring's leadership, the Independent Ethics Board approved significant reforms to Tallahassee's notoriously weak and ineffective ethics ordinances. And our coalition works closely with this board to persuade the City Commission to approve those reforms. By intent and design, they go well beyond the limited provisions of Florida's statutory ethics standards. When our coalition placed the charter amendment on the 2014 ballot, our goal was to have Tallahassee advance well beyond the minimal requirements of Florida law. There simply would have been no point in creating this board if we were satisfied with Chapter 112. Yet Mr. Reed has consistently advised this board against a key element of the reforms approved by this board less than 2 years ago. That is the all-important standard required to provide misuse of public position. Respectfully, we believe that Mr. Reed has provided poor legal advice on this issue to this board. And Mr. Reed, I just want to say, I know that attorneys have thick skins. I hope you know that we mean no disrespect in coming to that conclusion. We realize that in your last shade meeting, you apparently struggled uncomfortably with an ambiguous case which may have technically risen to the standard of misuse of public position. And in his memorandum that will be considered under agenda item 9, Mr. Reed uses a seldom cited 1991 case from the First District Court of Appeal to recommend reincorporating the term corruptly or devising an alternative that's specific, the specifics of which he does not provide. Please understand, we want to work with you on this issue. We want to help you provide a less drastic alternative. However, you have not provided a transcript for that shade meeting. Until it is provided, we are left in the dark and powerless to suggest a less drastic solution to the one advocated by Mr. Reed. I wish to emphasize that our purpose in seeking those transcripts is not to engage in some kind of gotcha moment, but to try to understand the dilemma that you face and, in good faith, help resolve the issue without gutting the reforms our coalition, working so closely with this board, implemented just 2 years ago. We are your best friend, but if you renege on this most important reform, we will have no choice but to vigorously oppose your effort, which would be an embarrassment to the board, to the coalition, and to the city. In the meantime, I want to also point out that we fully support Mr. Floyd's suggestion based on the experiences of the Miami-Dade County Commission on Ethics and Public Trust to consider a two-tiered approach that deems minor issues distinct from serious charges of misuse of public position. Advisory opinions may also be an important tool in an arsenal which prevents potential violations from occurring in the first place. Thank you.
That same one right there. My name is Stanley Sims. I'm at 1320 Avondale Way. Congratulations on staying in the position.
Nominated, I still have to be confirmed, but thank you.
I'm claiming it in the name of Jesus. I'm going to say something that I hope citizens of integrity got a little trustees. I'm tired of 5 white folks feel like they speak for everybody. They are not inclusive. They don't openly recruit. I tried to join. They never sent me an invitation. And we've been elected 5 white people carry the weight of Tallahassee and make them think they can make our independent director 5 white folks. They get over object. They're not open. They don't have open enrollment. I've never received anything saying I could be a member of this thing. I've told them I wanted to be a member.
Mr. Sims.
No, I'm just saying, they're speaking on this item. This is on this item.
And he directed to the board.
No, it is.
Issues
I'm trying to the board.
of the board, do not direct it to them.
This is an issue for the board.
What is the issue that you want us to consider regarding the issue?
The issue I want you to consider for the board is, you allow citizens of integrity, which is in my opinion, a closed older white group, because I've tried to join and can't join. I have not received any information to be a part of this, but they carry a lot of weight. I think that's important. My second thing is this. We cannot, if they're going to scrutinize our independent ethics office, they need to be scrutinized. That's only fair. Now, I pray that that's not part of my time. Now, my second thing is this. I agree with what what Tom said about this here. This gives us proof. This gives this board a little bit more integrity to deal with public officials. We're going to gear up with elections. And based on what I know and what's coming down, we got already a high number of job complaints with the city, discriminatory complaints with the city that's coming. And this policy and giving some strength to these charges. Last time I came here, I asked for the ethics board to look for inconsistencies or how ethics complaints are investigated and why they're so different. And how they're different is because it gives the city more leverage. One policy you can start with, if you file a claim against the city then no longer talks to you or do business with you. I think that's unethical. Those are the things, I don't know if he I saw it in the notes, but it didn't say whether or not he researched that or not. Those things are important. And so, since we all got a little thick skin in here, let's all tell the truth.
Other public comments, Mr. Chair?
Moving on to 7A.
Seven A,
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question? What is the next step on the proposed
lobbying language.
misuse, revision to the city ordinance on misuse of positions?
Well, we're gonna come back and talk about that later in the
Okay, okay.
agenda.
Because I would like to hear more about the two-tier approach. I know we've talked about that before, but I'd like to hear it discussed a little bit more.
Yeah, that'll be number 9. Yeah.
Okay,
John is well prepared.
okay. You don't mean to jump ahead, just don't want to also forget what I was thinking.
If you want to, we can talk about it.
No, I don't, no, it doesn't matter to me when, just.
You want to go ahead and talk about it while it's fresh, Mr. Chair?
No, let's go in order.
Okay.
Jump around, you've been track here. 7A.
Okay. 7A is the, we said we would report back on the lobbying language. And John and I talked about this quite a bit. Just to summarize and bring us up to speed, and I'm going to speak from when I arrived because this was something that was started before I took the job. And when at the first meeting, there was a review of the language, and John and I was asked to go back, and we made a second swap effort at it. And it was almost, the response was almost like, we'll know it when we see it. And one of the things I observed is that the coalition had a lot of comments regarding it. So I wasn't directed to do this by the board. This is something I decided to do to help move this along. I met with the coalition to get their input. And as you recall, I brought their input to the board. The board voted on it and asked us to massage it, and John massaged it and brought it back to the board. And the board said, let's move forward this part. And at that point, I made a recommendation that we get feedback from the city treasurer because he is the one who's most aware of how current implementation is. But it wasn't just that reason, but earlier in the process, when we're still working on language, when Richard Herring was on the board, he mentioned that as an option to speak with city treasurer clerk. So it wasn't just my idea. We did speak with the clerk, and we met with him twice. We got some feedback that I want to share. And in sharing it, my perspective is that rather than just take the language and give it to the commission, that we craft, and when I say we, John and I craft a memo that explains the board's position, so that there is civil dialogue on what we're asking them to consider, rather than just giving it to them and kind of throwing it to the wind, and, you know, whoever lobbies for it or whatever does that, that we have a direct medium from the board on why this is important and what the board's position is. So if there's a response, it can be in relation to what the board, both what the board submits and why the board submits it. So it's not just a random act on the board's part. And that would also help me if I'm asked questions. In a better position to stand for the board. We did speak with him. As I recall, there was one of the things we submitted. They said they were already doing on the website. Which one was that?
We had, there were 4 issues recommended. The one was we mandate the city clerk to provide updated website with registration, and that's something that's already being done currently through policy.
So that's one, for example. If you still want to submit it, you can, but I just wanted to make you aware that that one was in the works. Language is from valid issue. We discussed the changing the definition. We had quite a bit of discussion on that. And the feedback we got is that there was a recent adoption by the blueprint. And that the county and city approved, and that was language they most favored. Again, that doesn't prohibit us from doing something different. But that was his feedback, that that's what they favor most at this point. So that'll be the obstacle that we have to overcome to get them to adopt what we're interested in. They thought that the contact log, they found problematic. They saw that as sort of a gotcha moment if they missed a contact. And what's their legal ruling that lean in the opposite direction? But that was their feedback on that. They thought it was problematic because they didn't want to, if they miss something, then it becomes a gotcha moment for them. What did I miss?
The definition. If you talk about definition, I want to, they've already dealt with that, I think. Contact log.
Yeah.
City office.
Yeah, no problem. And he's the one that's going to make the recommendations to the city commission. And I'm not saying, please, I want everybody to understand that I'm not saying don't take it. I'm saying that simply giving them the language would not be sufficient without explaining why. And what I'm proposing is that we draft something to support the language, bring it back for your review and approval. Then they'll know that it's coming from you and why you support it.
The other issue was contingency fee. We wanted to have a ban on contingency fee. Didn't seem to have any objection or support for it. They understood the position.
So with that, what I'm proposing is that we draw up a memo and bring it back to you for your review, so that we give them a formal proposal, and that you review it, massage it, approve it. And that would be the voice of the board.
We need a motion.
Any questions first on this?
Could I speak to that? I did put in a card, but I put it for the unagenda items. I just want to, I did want to speak on this issue.
Three minutes.
Down here. Members of the board and Chair Ray, I'm Ben Wilcox with Citizens for Ethics Reform. As always, I want to thank members of the board for your service. And we'd also like to congratulate Vice Chair Graham on her recent appointment by President Biden. As you know, the charter amendment that created this board gives you the ability to recommend proposed ordinances to the City Commission in areas relating to ethics, including lobbying. The board developed such a proposed ordinance last year and adopted it unanimously. That should really be the end of your process. I hear what Mr. Floyd is saying about drafting a memo to accompany that ordinance, and I don't have any problem with that. I think that's great. I just want to make sure we're not going to be going back and trying to change the ordinance based on the concerns of city staff. You know, it's not the board's job to you know, work with the city in some way to come up with something that will pass. Your job is to propose the best lobbying ordinance that you can come up with, and then let the city modify it or reject it or whatever, and then they have to take the the heat that goes along with that. So anyway, I overall I like what I'm hearing Mr. Floyd say, and thank you for your work on this.
Thank you. And I think the approach we're taking is the best approach as far as we gotta get support from the commission on this matter. And they're going to, like, I've been on advisory boards, I would turn to staff on their position on the matter. These commissions will be on the staff, but if we can get buy-in from the staff and see where they're coming from, the concerns they have, we can address them in the front end. And I don't see any issue. I don't see where we're discussing so far as we want to withhold or hold back from our position. It's more to have a strong front going into this matter to get sure we have the support and address the concern in the front. We already discussed with staff what the concerns are. That can be addressed in our memo, so they know where we are in the position. So I approve, I applaud you in this process. I think it's more along just fine. I think this is the best course. We look forward to seeing this memo and then moving forward with this process, and hopefully we can get buy-in from the commission on these matters. I thank you for this work. Is that it on 7A?
That's all I have.
Okay, moving on to 8. Advisory opinions.
Okay, I think at the last meeting, we discussed that it's a goal of ours is to preferably get in front of problems instead of cleaning them up. So we'd like to be able to provide advisory opinions to members of public officials, elected officials, appointed staff, et cetera, who may have issues in which they have sincere questions on whether their actions would violate the ethics code. Well, we did receive a request from a member of the city commission regarding a letter of support or letter of recommendation, whether that would fall under the misuse of public position. I separated the issue into 2 issues. One, whether speaking as a member of the city commission constituted misuse, and 2, whether the communication being done on city letterhead constituted a misuse. This And I found it to be no in both cases. And the reason being, and this kind of is a good way to parlay into the misuse of position, is the concern I've had with the misuse of public office or the public position we have now is that it doesn't require that the act be a wrongful act. It just says that it be an act that secures some type of benefit for a third person, which could be interpreted as meaning everything a city commissioner does to benefit anybody ever. And that was not our intent, if I recall correctly. But what I've done here is I've tried to read the ordinance in a way to say that the title, which says misuse of position, I've said implies that the act must be wrongful. So once I use that, I incorporate that understanding into the plain language of the ordinance, and I then go through the standards, find that it was not a misuse of position. And because, and I do reference the case law regarding corruptly, because the corruptly provides the requirement that there be some wrongful intent. And there was a statement a few minutes ago by Mr. Herring about corrupt intent that was in 838. But the 1991 case, which is still good law, it's precedent which the courts follow out of the first DCA, says that the word corruptly, for some reason, and it is probably an act of judicial activism, they kind of rewrote the statute, says that it's not corrupt intent, but it's wrongful intent because there's something done that falls outside the public purpose of that person's position. So I use that interpretation in determining, well, our ordinance doesn't say that the act has to be outside their public purpose. I use this term misuse to follow the wrongful intent analysis that's been implied by the Commission on Ethics and through advisory opinions and final orders that have gone to Delaware. And when doing that, I found that in this case, there was no wrongful act being done in a way that would constitute a misuse of position. So it just turned out that the timing had to be, misuse of position seemed to be the topic for the month. So, but this was helpful because it did provide me an opportunity to review a lot of the case law to find out what, I think we want to prevent people from misusing the position in a way that's not intended by the public. And I think the concern that we had in our closed sessions and here is that the ordinance is written opens that door maybe a little too wide. So I've done an interpretation here on this advisory opinion that using the word misuse narrows the definition to provide some type of wrongful act. And in both cases, I found there was not a misuse because it's simply a letter of recommendation. Case law that's been cited is pretty extensive. There was a mayor who regularly wrote letters of recommendation for his friends on city letterhead. Commission on Ethics said that that was not a misuse of position. There was another woman, a clerk from St. Lucie County, that used, well, she didn't specify, so they actually split theirs into two, like I did. And they said if she was to make a recommendation for somebody to have a job on her own letterhead, then where it came out. So it would not be a misuse if she did it on her own letterhead, and they went further and said it would not be a misuse if it was done on official letterhead, as long as that person didn't have some type of business relationship with her office, the clerk's office. So I used some of these cases to tie back. I thought the fact patterns were very similar to what we were dealing with here, as long as it was considered to be a wrongful act that we were prohibiting in our ordinance, and that was my finding. So,
Any questions from the board on the opinion?
And we are seeking your approval.
Any comments? Edits? Motion? Motion?
So moved.
So move second. Mr. Smith, seconds. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you. So this
we'll post this on our website and we'll bring at least two more to you at the next meeting.
I'll sign this up with meeting.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to number 9.
Okay, misuse, I know we've kind of gone over that. I respectfully disagree with Mr. Herring to some degree on the issue of term corruptly, but I will say, if you look at my memo and just skip to the very end, I say reincorporating the term corruptly or leaving it how it is are two extremes. So the board may wish to avoid the term corruptly and find language somewhere in the middle. And I think that was what we discussed in our meeting last month, but not necessarily go back to corrupt. But I felt it was important. You cite the Blackburn 1991 case because I'm providing background, because I felt it was important that the board see what the state statute says, what the definition of corruptly is in state statute, what it's been defined as case law. And then I also thought it was important to go back to see what the city commission originally had adopted for misuse, because we had different language previously that had the word corruptly. I thought it was important to look at that and then put that next to what we came up with in this next, in the new ordinance. And I did highlight in a manner which he or she knows or should know with the exercise of reasonable care will result in a special privilege, benefit, or exemption for himself or herself. And I know I had conversations with Dwight, and I said, well, what if somebody were to go to the mayor and say, can you write me a letter of recommendation for college? Is that the kind of act we want to prohibit? I guess the answer is no, but I don't know. I think that that's kind of expected. You ask your elected officials, members of Congress, state legislators, elected officials, they have somebody that maybe interns in office that write them a letter of recommendation. We think that that isn't appropriate. I think, and that was what the case law, based on that advisory opinion, stated, is that it's if the act goes outside what is kind of acceptable in the public perception of what a job should be. And I think that we may want to find some type of language that brings us from where we are today, where we were before with the word corruptly, and find somewhere in the middle that gets us to essentially say that the act is wrong, that's being done. And it's not for a general public purpose. So I didn't draft any language because I wanted to put that to the board to see if that was the direction this board wanted to go in, or whether you wanted to leave it how it was, or whether you want to go the way it was before I move forward on any language.
And let me just say that when I'm looking at legal sufficiency, I've struggled with this one because right now it's very literal, and I don't think that the new one should know really gets to intent. I think intent is important. I think that is reflected in some of your actions when you're struggle with some of this, because the literal would say, if, I'm looking at a case where I could have gone totally the opposite way. If in my own mind, I didn't consider intent, but the board is not trying to run over anybody or abuse authority, and it's trying to show some humanity. And so what we're trying to do is give the board and me that latitude to look at intent, and determine whether, as John said, it's a wrongful act, and not just take a literal meaning that would just, right now, it's, if the attorneys have to talk through it to draw a conclusion, then there's something wrong, because we're teaching it to the everyday person, and they need to be able to understand it and follow it. And I need to be able to understand it and follow it and apply it without having to go study case law. So.
I think we mentioned the idea that we like the approach of the two-tier system. I think right now what we've been told is, right, the language we have now kind of prevents us from doing that two-tier system of reviewing cases. Would it be advisable to review Miami-Dade's intent as well as West Palm Beach County to see how they have their language set up? Because Miami-Dade, we know for sure has a two-tier system where the others option told us to review the case, and the cases he deals with on his own, because he can tell from the complaint and the evidence he derives from the investigation, you can dismiss or move forward. Okay, so let's continue to work on this. I think as much time as keep it what we have right now, but let's see if we can get some examples from other counties, especially the ones that actually have a two-tier system, to see what they have in place.
I will say, I think it was stated before, Palm Beach took the word corruptly out of the statute. They actually, it's still in their ordinance. They actually have a two-tier system. They have a misuse, which is very general, and then they have a corrupt misuse. So they have two. And we might want to look into how that is put in practice, because obviously the punishment would be different for those two prohibited acts. So, but that is something we could look into.
Comments or
Just had a quick comment. I think that the reason that everyone struggles with this mightily, it seems, is that, that corruptly language almost requires you to get into the head of the person who's committing the act, or ask them, if you do this with some corrupt intent, presumably the person would say no to that. And then you're left with, okay, well now what? Because there's no objective type of analysis that's built into the misuse of public position statute in the Code of Ethics. So if we can do something about that, where we're working in, whether it's this wrongful intent and it involves this knew or should have known, or a reasonable person standard, where we're not totally reliant on the person's their internal brain workings to discover whether there was a corrupt intent. But if we can use some sort of a standard, I think that potentially benefits everyone, because it makes the cases clearer, and it makes it clearer what type of conduct would be prohibited by the ordinance. I know I'm not offering a solution. I'm not offering you any
No, I
which
think
is unfair, but that's kind of how I would think through it. I'm happy to work with you on that.
No, I think that'd be great. I do think that is a good point. I think that, like I said, the Blackburn takes corruptly and says it's not corrupt intent, which is really strange. I've always struggled with Blackburn. They say it's wrongful, but I think that kind of goes back to the general practice of this. So if you look at the advisory opinion that we just adopted, on page 2, halfway through the page, I said the revised city ordinance intentionally omits the term corruptly, which raises the question as to whether an act that is done for a proper public purpose but still benefits another would constitute a violation. This kind of made the case. This would be the correct interpretation of the ordinance, that nearly every act of public officials would constitute a violation of the ordinance. The title of the ordinance, misuse of public position, clearly implies that the act must be appropriate, not serve a public purpose. So that was my interpretation, so we could set a precedence that we could follow for future hearings. But we may want to just take that language, proper public purpose, and find a way to put that into our ordinance. That way we don't have to go towards the corruptly language, but we at least say it's not just something that benefits somebody like a letter of recommendation or something. It's something that's just so out of the norm that's not expected by a city commissioner or a public official or a city employee that it does rise to that level. And that may be that middle point. That was the point I wanted to bring up today.
This is a difficult topic, just to wrap your brain around. But to me, it's difficult, but it's also simple, because you know it when you hear it, right? I mean, so how do we find language that captures that? You just use the word inappropriate. Like, for instance, I'm not sure where it is in all this paperwork, but I read about, and I'm not, someone that used his or her position to try to get a parking spot, that the parking lot was closed. I don't know where it was in all this.
That was in Richard Herring's notes.
Okay, so I saw a
It's
Richard
a
note.
case. It's a
I
state.
mean, in a million years, that's just not appropriate. I mean, to say I'm X, Y, and Z and I deserve to have a spot. I mean, you just know it when you hear it. So, I mean, that's in my opinion. I have a very high ethical standard, though, and for everybody who is either in elected office or public service, if it's something that you, again, I use this as an example, if it's something you don't want on the front page of any newspaper, I don't think there's anyone who would want to have a headline, ex-commissioner, tried to use his or her position to get a spot at Joe Campbell Stadium. I mean, it just, it just, you know it when you hear it. So I don't know how we capture that, but I was one of the ones I remember back on corruptly, where corruptly, I don't think we should go back to the corruptly. We already decided that the standard that set, we wanted to capture more. How do we do that without going back to corruptly? And I think what Robin said was also in line with what I think we were trying to do, you know, back when we made these changes. So John, you just write that up, okay?
Got it.
Yeah.
No, and I
Don't
think,
want it on the front page of the newspaper, don't do it standard.
I think that's essentially the way.
Yeah, I think we have this, make it clear what it takes to violate ethics ordinance. That's our goal here. To have language that someone can look at it, not, our ruling is not dependent on the mood we're in that day, but dependent on the actual language of the ordinance itself. So that's the issue, is that if it's now the point that we have to rack our brains to determine whether or not they violate the ordinance, then it's not clear. If it's not clear to us, it's gonna be less clear to the people it applies to. So that's what we gotta work towards. It's something that once we get a complaint, we can go through the evidence and check off, okay, it meets this criteria, that criteria, then it is a violation of our ordinance. Something to affect that. Almost like a checklist. We did all these things. That's clear that you violate. The letter of recommendation, you can interpret it, but it seems that it's clear from case law that that's not a violation of ordinance. But it's one of the things we got to make sure that it's anybody who reads it, any lay person can read it and say, okay, fine, act will take is going to violate the ordinance. So,
Frankly, I think lay people probably are better at
oh yeah,
when they
they'll
see
try
it.
to find a way
They
around
know
it.
what it is. I mean, so,
They're more cautious than.
does anybody else think it would be appropriate for a legislator to say, I should gain access to this parking lot because I'm in the Florida legislature?
What you do.
Well, the case was reversed and they said that he did not act corruptly.
Because of the corrupt language. Is that accurate?
Well, they said because he actually received a ticket and he paid the ticket. He just, probably know who it is. He just kind of created a scene and kind of got in the law enforcement officer's face and said that, I'm gonna do that. And they said, no, you can't do that. And they gave him a ticket and he paid the ticket. But then they.
So what he was doing originally was wrong, but he got a ticket for it and he paid the ticket, so he thought the hook.
Yes. But then the court does actually, because I pulled the opinion real quick, and they do say, in no way are we saying what he did was proper.
Again, that's my problem with all this. At the end of the day, we should hold these people to higher standards. And letting them off the hook is wrong. I don't agree with it.
No, and I think that the public purpose language that we discussed would cover somebody trying to gain access to a parking lot using the "do you know who I am" rationale.
Yeah.
Which I think is what we would like to prevent here.
Yes. Huh, I can't wait to find out who this is. Well, that's a relief.
Any more discussion on 9 this time? So basically, the next steps will be you'll review some other ordinances and case law, see what we can come with some middle ground to establish a potential two-tier system that will allow our ethics officer to conduct investigations and bring those cases that reach the level, reach a certain level to us. And we want to seek to deal with himself. Seek our approval. Number 9, on to 10, public comment on non-agenda items.
You all had covered.
All right, good. Here, that's what's in.
Very quickly, we're obviously going to have an opportunity to come back to talk to you about the lobby disclosure, registration, and regulation issues that you have already suggested reforms. Yes, the Blueprint organization, the county, the city all have basically the same non-working lobby disclosure requirement. And the heart of the issue goes to the definition of this. And it's a class catch-22 circular argument. And that argument is lobbyists, anyone who engages in lobbying activities is a lobbyist. But a lobbyist, such as Drew Jones, says, well, I'm not a lobbyist. I'm a consultant. I don't engage in lobbying activities. And therefore, he feels he doesn't have to register as a lobbyist. In my mind, if we don't go to the heart of this issue, which is the definition of lobbyist, we might as well be doing nothing. Because that's exactly what's happening in the county, in the city, and before the blueprint. And we have testified to all three of those. And unfortunately, I don't know, I feel like I'm speaking to a brick wall. They look at me, their eyes glaze over, and as though I don't know what I'm talking about. But it is so obvious to me that it's a circular catch-22 argument. I'm not a lobbyist because I don't engage in lobbying activities. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Drew Jones, but according to an article in the Tallahassee Democrat, I think it was January 16th of a year ago, basically the argument was he's the guy who's running the city that you've never heard of. And it's because he doesn't register as a lobbyist because he says, I'm a consultant. So we'll have an opportunity, obviously, to come back and discuss this further.
Let me second your motion. Yes. And I'd like to go, Mr. Sam's 1320, and I want to go a little further to prove his point. We have different municipalities within the government, and here's what makes it murky, Mr. Carlos. I may just be a businessman at the city commission meeting, but at the IA meeting, where I'm trying to get business, I'm not just a businessman. Because I've got a contract on the line. So I'm acting in a different mode. So what he says is because of the way our government is set up and the way we disperse money into different entities, we move from one Cleoca to the other. Depends on what meeting I'm in. And so he does have a valid point because when I'm at the city commission meeting, I'm just a citizen. But if I'm at the IA meeting, who is deciding how $50 million is going to impact economic boom, and I'm a businessman who wants some of that money, he has some very valid concerns, and people are changing modes based on the moment of the day. And so I know you all are some very smart people, but I wanted to second that point because if I'm at the IA meeting, I'm lobbying. For me right now, I have a proposal for $1.4 million for the revitalization of Frenchtown. When I'm there, I'm not talking about, I'm going to be talking about business. And so it's just a valid point. Guilty verdict. That's what I have to say. Yeah.
Any further public comment on agenda items? Discussion regarding future meetings. Any requests? Any directives?
One of the issues we've been talking with city staff is in our ordinance, we define procurement employees. And it's extremely broad, and I think we're concerned that we may inadvertently capture administrative staff. Because it essentially says anybody that handles a bid of some sort. And I think we had talked about maybe trying to look at this language and see if there's any precedent. I think I don't think there's much at the state level that addresses the issue. I think we took the language out of a different ordinance at the state level, but it wasn't in the ethics code, if I remember correctly. But with this board's permission, I'd like to kind of look into that issue and provide just a quick analysis on where we got it, what it does, and what potential pitfalls might be.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that if there's a dollar threshold, that person has spend authority over a certain amount, that might help us. That the commission uses that. Theirs is 35,000, which is pretty high, but
Yeah, ours is 10, but
you're still
but-
capturing
yes.
like a more
Because
clerical
they don't
level.
have, it doesn't say they have the authority to spend. And I think we've been interpreting it as if that was what our intent was, because I think that was our intent. If somebody just handles a bid, they have no say over that. Like there was another issue, if somebody provides a recommendation, if somebody goes to say, hey, what do you think of the cell phone service we're using? Did that person provide a recommendation that rises to the level of being a procurement employee? So I think those are some of the issues we've discussed that we may want to just clarify and make sure. And it may be something we do through ordinance, or maybe something we do through an advisory opinion, just that we know that, so the public knows what the standard is going to be and how we're going to enforce it.
And it's not just the public, I need to know what the standard is too, because the way I've spoken to it is, it's trying to get to those people who influence decision-making, who gets contracted, who doesn't. That's kind of the way I've been explaining it, but that may not be correct, so I need clarification. It's not.
The definition that's in the ordinance includes both the $35,000 threshold, which is the threshold for filing financial disclosure.
Right.
And then it also includes this other part of state law about anybody who has any, basically, I mean, it's a very, very broad definition of involvement in procurement. And that's the PE and the rights, that's the definition of procurement. So it's this very extensive definition. There isn't much in the commission's opinions to better define it, or state law. So, but the 35,000 is acknowledged as well. That's a separate category. People who are required to file financial disclosure either by definition in the statute or because they're authorized to spend over $35,000.
Thank you.
So yes, yeah, I think it's,
Okay, thank you.
any other for the board? Mr. Payne moves to adjourn. Mr. Adams seconds. We are adjourned.
Thank you.